the middle of it.
And in fairness to the folks out there, and we have some footage of this, they were lured there.
Yes.
And in some places to towns like Boise City, Oklahoma, that actually really didn't exist.
Yes.
I mean, there was a lot of fraud going on, and people, got shown these, we see here, these pamphlets saying, invest in the fastest growing country in the West, and you can grow one crop and it'll repay your whole purchase price. Come out and see. And they came out and saw, and there wasn't much there. Yeah, a lot of them felt really betrayed by that too. In some senses, it was a sense of fraud. The railroads needed to fill these little towns that were along the farms. They needed to have freight and grain shipped along these routes. So the railroads were in cahoots with it, but the government also was trying to figure out a way to settle this area that they'd called the Great American Desert. Now, most people think that most of the homesteading in the United States happened in the 19th century. That's not true. Most of it happened at the start of the 20th century when they doubled the Homestead Act. You could go from 320 acres to 640 acres. So that was a very big deal. You could go on, you and your wife, you 640 acres, but 640 acres of very dry land, of treeless land, of land where the only way you could get water, where they would buy one of these little windmill kits from Sears and Roebuck, and it would come out on the train, and you'd go get the windmill kit, take it out to your homestead, and voila, you had water. Now, that narrator said earlier, plow at your own peril. Yes. We know now that why this happened. We took up all the good grass that was holding the soil down. But the film was kind of controversial at the time by pointing the finger back at humans, because some people said, well, it's a weather-related event, or God is punishing us. So at the time, it was quite controversial. But humans caused this disaster. Very good point. And that's now the consensus view of historians on the Dust Bowl, that the wind, they recognize this. The wind always blows in the Southern Plains. I mean, it didn't blow uniquely in the 1930s. The Southern Plains always has drought. This was a tough drought, but drought has always been there before. So those two elements were there and have always been there. What was missing this time was they had taken this grassland, which Walt Whitman had called that delicate miracle, the ever-recurring grassland, and an area the size of the state of Pennsylvania was turned upside down. I quote a Native American who looks out at this thing at the peak of the Dust Bowl, and he turns to his son and he says, wrong side up. And that's really, in its simplest terms, the story of the Dust Bowl. This grassland would have been perfect for grazing. It was not good for farming. They turned it up, and then when everything went bad, it all took to the sky. I had to say, when I was reading your book, I thought about the victims of Katrina. Yes. Another natural disaster, of course, but one that was made worse by man-made levees. Right. And is this not, in some sense, this story, the story of the Dust Bowl, a fable that, nature wins out, and humans' hubris is... Yeah, it's funny you use the word fable, because that's, as I started to figure out how to write this story, I suddenly one day had this flash, this sort of epiphany, oh my God, it's a fable. And that's the way I tried to tell the story of 3 parts. It really is a fable. Here's Eden. Here's the greatest grassland the world ever had. It's good times, and then they push it. A little bit is greed, because grain prices went through the roof, wheat went through, and then they push it, and then there's sort of nature's revenge. You're absolutely right. And it's interesting you pointed out Katrina. Until Hurricane Katrina, the Dust Bowl was the cause of the greatest single movement of Americans, diaspora, of any singular event in American history. So it took that long for anything else to force so many people to leave their land. Well, I wonder when we'll see a book similar to yours about the people who stayed in New Orleans, in those areas, and what they've been through. Right. Similar to this. Now, you're working on another book about, I don't know if this is a theme here, about natural disasters, but you are working about a book that our viewers will be very interested in. It's about the fires of 1910 in Idaho that devastated several towns. And obviously those survivors are not alive, but there's a lot of material to look at. And what's drawn you to that story and to Idaho? I'm going from dust to fire, I guess, here. It's, I've been covering forest fires my whole professional life, and my whole professional life I've heard about the 1910 fire, and I never really knew what it was. And I started to look at it. It was incredible. In 36 hours, 3 million acres were burned, and 5 towns burned to the ground. Wallace, Idaho, half of it was destroyed. Nearly 100 people died. And I really was attracted to it, not just because it's a great sort of, again, sort of a fable-like story about,
should we have fought these fires, and should we have thrown these people into these fires? But it's a great immigration story. Idaho at that time, between 1900 and 1910, tripled its population. And this peak surge of Italian immigrants, Greek immigrants, largely southern Mediterranean, people who had missed out on the first big wave of immigration. And then poor Irish from places like Butte, Montana, were the people who died. Almost everyone who died in this fire was an immigrant who had come here for the mines, for this or for that, and was suddenly thrown into this thing. And then you have this great story about the founding of the United States Forest Service by Teddy Roosevelt and Gifford Pinchot. It was only 5 years old. Remember, it was founded in 1905 when the fire hit. And it was on its last legs. Roosevelt had left office. It was being defunded. And this fire sort of made heroes of these early United States Forest Rangers, and in a curious way, helped to save the agency. So this is like written hard into the mythic DNA of every forest ranger too. So I'm having a lot of fun putting the book together. The problem is, like, unlike the Dust Bowl book, where I could look into the eyes of someone and say, tell me your story.
Right.
And I would just weep after hearing, these amazing details. No one's alive from that
well,
era. So
hopefully you'll stumble across a diary the way that you did for your Dust Bowl book, which was just, if you read this book, some of the most compelling chapters are this man's diary that he kept that almost got burnt, literally got raised from the ashes. And I hope you're able to find some of those primary source writings for this as well.
Diaries are amazing glimpses into how people really did live an era.
We've mentioned migration several times. People migrated from the Dust Bowl to this area. People migrated into this area, as you mentioned, for work in the 1900s. The story of the West continues to be migration.
Absolutely.
We're one of the fastest growing regions in the country. You're a native Westerner, grew up in Spokane. You've made it your priority to cover these issues, for the Times and in your books. Is there a sense of chagrin? Are you disappointed? Or are we losing something of the West with all the in-migration that we're seeing?
I mean, maybe we're losing some sense of institutional memory, which is really important, especially a place like the West where nobody's from here. I mean, almost everybody.
Except for the Native Americans are from here.
Yeah, exactly. Very good point. I mean, almost everybody, you look at these cities like Phoenix and Denver and Seattle and Portland, and to a lesser extent Boise, and you have 2/3 of the people who live there didn't grow up there, so they don't have the institutional memory. But I'm sort of a contrarian in this regard. I like the new West. I like the new people that bring energy and ideas. I look at what's happening in the West now, and I see young, really vibrant cities. And Boise is sort of typical of that. I mean, young people want to come here. They didn't want to come here 20 years ago. It was thought of as stodgy.
Little Beirut,
exactly, fuddy-duddy and all of that. And I was saying this to someone the other day. They really want to come here, and they want to come to Denver's Soto District. They want to come to Seattle because they got clean energy, tomorrow-looking jobs. They have tech jobs. And what they also have is public land at their doorstep. That's always how I define the West. People don't know this, but we are the most urban area in the United States. Urban defined as percentage of people who live in an urban area. The West is more urban than upstate New York, more urban than Pennsylvania. So the West is really fast-growing cities surrounded by public land, which we fight over. What to do with the water, what to do with the timber, what to do with wilderness areas, or how to make wilderness areas. So, I mean, I see all the growth, and sure, I'm bothered by the sprawl. I mean, I was stuck in the sprawl of Greater Phoenix a couple of weeks ago, and it was just extraordinary. I mean, it took me half a day to move a mile. And it's ugly, and it doesn't, fit in the desert, and it's all going to come to a collapse at some point, or you fear that. It's just, I wrote a series once called Becoming LA, which is about the 6 fastest growing cities in the West, and every one of them said they were not going to become Los Angeles, and they were all becoming Los Angeles. So, I don't like that, but I like the new energy, and I like the freshness, of new people coming in.